Malik walked slowly through the tall gates of his new school, his backpack feeling heavier than usual. The building looked like a palace. Large windows, golden walls, and shiny floors that reflected the morning light. Everything felt too perfect, too clean, too unfamiliar. This was his first day at St. Alden's Academy, one of the best schools in the city, known for its excellent teachers and rich students. Malik's mother had worked 2 jobs to get him a scholarship here. She believed it was his chance for a better future. But as Malik stepped into the long hallway, lined with trophies and portraits of old, serious-looking headmasters, he wasn't so sure anymore. Students passed by him in neat uniforms, navy blazers with gold stripes and shiny shoes that clicked on the wooden floors. They all seemed to know where to go, laughing in small groups, whispering secrets, sharing smiles. Malik kept walking quietly, clutching his books, feeling the eyes on him. Some students glanced at him with curiosity. Others gave him short, cold looks. It wasn't hard to notice he was different, the only black boy in the crowd. When he entered his classroom, the noise died down. The teacher, Ms. Whitmore, stood by the piano near the window. She was tall, neatly dressed, with sharp eyes that could silence a room without saying a word. She smiled at the other students, but only gave Malik a short, tight-lipped nod when he walked in. "Class," she said in a clipped voice, "we have a new student today. This is Malik." A few students murmured polite hellos, but most stayed silent. Malik nodded shyly and sat in the empty seat near the back. As he unpacked his things, he could feel Ms. Whitmore's eyes on him, measuring him, judging him, the way someone might look at a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. The lesson began with a review of classical composers. Names like Beethoven, Mozart, and Chopin filled the air. Ms. Whitmore's voice carried authority, and the students listened closely, nodding along as if every word she said was a commandment. Malik listened too, trying to focus, but he couldn't help noticing the pictures around the room. Grand concert halls, old pianos, and black and white portraits of famous musicians. Not one of them looked like him. When Ms. Whitmore asked questions, hands shot up eagerly. "Yes, Clara," she said. "Correct, Daniel," she smiled. But when her gaze landed on Malik, it lingered a little longer. He wasn't sure if she expected him to answer or simply wanted him to feel uncomfortable. Finally, she said, "Malik, do you know who composed for Elise?" The room went quiet again. Malik hesitated, his mind blank for a moment. He had heard the piece before. His mother used to hum it when she cleaned the house, but he wasn't sure who had written it. I think it was Beethoven," he said softly. Ms. Whitmore said, folding her arms. "Correct. But you should sound more confident when you speak." A few students snickered quietly. Malik looked down at his notebook, embarrassed. He promised himself to stay quiet for the rest of the class. After the lesson, the students gathered near the piano as Ms. Whitmore gave instructions for their upcoming recital. She spoke about posture, discipline, and respect for music. "Music," she said, tapping the piano lid, "is for those who understand refinement. It's not just noise or emotion, it's art." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Malik again as if her words carried an unspoken message. At lunch, Malik sat alone. The other students talked about weekend trips, dance classes, and music tutors. He listened but didn't join in. He missed his old school. The noise, the laughter, the feeling of belonging. Here everything felt cold and distant. When a group of boys walked past his table, one of them whispered something under his breath. Malik didn't catch all of it, but he heard the words scholarship and lucky. He stared at his food, pretending not to care, though a lump formed in his throat. That evening, at home, Malik told his mother it was fine. "The school's nice," he said, forcing a smile. She looked tired but proud. "I knew you'd fit in," she said, hugging him. "You're meant for great things, Malik. Don't forget that." When he went to his room, he sat by the window, staring at the small keyboard his mother had bought from a thrift shop years ago. It was missing 2 keys, but he still loved it. He ran his fingers lightly over the remaining ones, playing a soft tune he had learned by ear. Music had always been his escape, his way of expressing what words couldn't. But at school he felt like it wasn't enough. There, music seemed like a test, something you had to prove you were good enough for. As he played quietly in the dim light, Malik didn't know that his hidden talent would soon become the center of everyone's attention, the very thing that made him feel different. His quiet passion, his soulful connection to music, would soon silence every laugh, every doubt, every whisper in those golden hallways tomorrow. He would walk back into that classroom, still unsure of his place, unaware that a single moment was waiting, one that would change everything, not just for him, but for the teacher who thought she already knew who he was. The story of Malik had only just begun. The next morning, the sun glowed softly through the tall windows of the music hall. Malik walked inside, clutching his notebook, hoping to stay invisible. He had spent most of the night practicing on his small keyboard at home, but no amount of music could quiet his nerves. Today, Ms. Whitmore had promised the class a special practical session. Malik didn't know what that meant, but judging by the way the other students whispered and giggled, it wasn't going to be easy. The grand piano gleamed in the center of the room like a black mirror. Ms. Whitmore stood beside it, perfectly straight, her sharp eyes scanning the students as they took their seats. She wore her usual navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, class," she said in her calm, cold tone. "Today, we'll see how much you've really learned about musical expression. It's not enough to know names and theory. You must feel the music." The students straightened up, pretending to be excited. Ms. Whitmore's eyes moved slowly across the room, like a hawk searching for a target. Malik avoided her gaze, flipping open his notebook. "Let's start with a little performance," she said. "A volunteer?" No one raised a hand. The students shifted in their seats, whispering softly. Ms. Whitmore's smile tightened. "No volunteers? Then perhaps I'll choose someone." Her eyes landed on Malik. The silence thickened. "You, Malik," she said, her voice slicing through the room. "Why don't you show us what you can do?" Malik's heart thumped in his chest. "Ma'am, I haven't prepared anything." "That's quite all right," she said smoothly. "A true musician can play from the heart, even without preparation. Come, don't be shy." The students looked at each other, trying not to laugh. Malik stood slowly, feeling the weight of every stare on his back as he walked toward the piano. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. When he reached the instrument, Ms. Whitmore leaned closer to him, her voice low but sharp enough for others to hear. "You said yesterday that your mother hums Beethoven," she said with a mocking smile. "How charming. Let's see if you can honor him." "Play for Elise." Malik froze. He had never played the song fully. Only bits and pieces he had learned by listening, not by reading sheet music. "Ma'am, I don't really know the notes," he said softly. "Oh?" she said, pretending to be surprised. "But you said you knew Beethoven. Surely you can manage a simple melody." A few students chuckled. Malik looked down at the piano keys, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. "Go on," she said again, her tone slightly crueler this time. "Just a few bars. Show us what kind of musician you are." Malik sat at the piano bench, his hands trembling slightly. The black and white keys blurred before his eyes. He took a deep breath, hearing his mother's voice in his head. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." "Malik." He placed his fingers gently on the keys. At first, the sound was soft, hesitant, one note then another. The class began to snicker again. Malik ignored them. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the tune the way he had heard it at home, not from a book but from his heart. The notes started to connect, forming the melody. It wasn't perfect, but it carried something real. The laughter faded. Malik's hands moved with growing confidence, his fingers dancing lightly across the piano. The sound filled the room, delicate, full of emotion, like a story told without words. Ms. Whitmore's expression changed. Her smirk disappeared. She straightened slowly, her eyes narrowing in surprise. The melody grew stronger, richer. Malik's fear melted into focus. He didn't see the classroom anymore, only the piano, only the music. He didn't stop at Für Elise. Without realizing it, he drifted into his own melody, a piece he had created late at night when he couldn't sleep. It was soft and sad, like the sound of rain tapping against the window. It carried the ache of loneliness, the pride of resilience, the quiet power of someone who had always been underestimated. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was heavy, not with judgment, but awe. No one moved. Then from the back a student whispered, "Whoa," another said, "That was amazing." Malik looked up, confused. He expected laughter or scolding. Not silence, not wide eyes. Ms. Whitmore blinked, still processing what she had just heard. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she cleared her throat and said stiffly, "Well, that was certainly unexpected." Malik stood up quietly, not sure if it was praise or insult. He walked back to his seat. The students looked at him differently now, not with mockery, but with a new kind of respect. Ms. Whitmore turned toward the piano again, running her hand lightly over the keys. Something in her eyes had shifted. Confusion, maybe even guilt. "Class dismissed," she said abruptly. As everyone gathered their things, Malik slipped out of the room. His heart was still pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear and it was from relief. He had played. He had spoken through music and they had listened. From the window above, Ms. Whitmore watched him leave. For the first time in years, she felt her authority crack. That boy, the one she had chosen to embarrass, had shown her something she couldn't teach, something that came from somewhere pure. Malik didn't know it yet, but that moment had changed everything. What began as an act of humiliation had turned into the beginning of his recognition, and though Ms. Whitmore didn't say a word, she knew deep down that she had just witnessed a kind of brilliance that defied her prejudice, a brilliance she could no longer deny. Outside, Malik smiled faintly to himself as he walked home, humming the tune he had just played. For the first time since coming to St. Alden's, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt like hope. The next day, the tension in the music class was quiet but thick, like a storm waiting behind the clouds. Everyone had seen what happened yesterday. Malik's piano performance had silenced the entire room, including Ms. Whitmore. No one dared to talk about it openly, but the whispers were everywhere, in the hallway, in the cafeteria, even in the courtyard. "Did you hear Malik play? He's actually good." Even Ms. Whitmore didn't say anything. But not everyone liked it. Some students looked at Malik with envy, others with confusion. A few still couldn't accept that the new boy, the boy who wasn't one of them, could play better than any of them. And Ms. Whitmore? She looked unsettled. When she entered the classroom that morning, her usual strict confidence seemed a little forced. Her smile was thinner, her tone sharper. "Good morning, class," she said, setting down her music sheets. "Let's not get too carried away by yesterday's little surprise." Malik looked down at his desk. He had hoped she might finally see his talent and maybe even be proud. But instead, her voice carried that same cold edge, like she needed to remind everyone who was in charge. She walked slowly around the room, her heels clicking like a metronome. "A true musician must show consistency," she said. "One lucky performance does not make one great." Her eyes met Malik's for a moment, steady, challenging. "We'll see if that performance was skill. Or luck." The class went silent again. Malik's stomach tightened. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "Come," she said suddenly, motioning toward the piano. "Let's hear you again." This time the request sounded different, less like a lesson, more like a test. Malik hesitated. He had thought yesterday was over, that maybe he'd earned her respect. But now it felt like she wanted to prove something. He stood up slowly and walked toward the piano again. His classmates leaned forward in their seats, waiting. Some looked excited, others uncomfortable. Ms. Whitmore stood beside the piano, arms crossed. "Let's make this interesting," she said. "You'll play what I choose. Not your own songs. Not what you've memorized. Let's see how well you can really follow music." She placed a sheet of complex classical notes on the stand, something advanced, filled with fast runs and tricky chords. Malik looked at it and felt his heart drop. He couldn't read sheet music very well. He had learned mostly by ear, playing what he heard, what he felt. I can't read this fast," he said quietly. Her eyebrow arched. "Can't read it fast? Or can't read it at all?" A few students giggled. "I can read it," Malik said softly, his voice trembling. "Just not perfectly." "Then try," she said curtly. "That's what this school expects. Effort." He sat down, his hands hovering above the keys. The notes on the page looked like a maze of black lines and dots. He tried to follow them, playing slowly, carefully. The sound was hesitant, broken, unsure. Ms. Whitmore sighed loudly. No, she said, stepping closer. "You're rushing here, dragging there. That's not precision, Malik. Music demands discipline." Her voice grew sharper with every word. The class sat frozen, watching. Malik's chest felt tight. The beautiful feeling he'd had yesterday, the pride, the connection, it was gone now, replaced by shame. "Again," she said. He started over. His fingers stumbled on the second line. "Stop," Ms. Whitmore snapped. "You see? This is why understanding structure is important. Emotion means nothing without skill." Malik bit his lip. He could feel everyone staring at him. A part of him wanted to run out of the room, but another part, the stronger part, told him to stay. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "May I try it my way, ma'am?" Ms. Whitmore frowned. "Your way?" "Yes," he said, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Without the paper." For a moment, the class froze. The teacher looked almost amused. "Fine," she said coolly. "Play it your way." Malik closed his eyes. He blocked out the whispers, the tension, the fear. Then softly his fingers began to move. He didn't play what was written on the paper. He played what he heard in his heart, a version of the melody that felt alive. His rhythm was natural, flowing like water. Each note carried emotion, a story. The song wasn't perfect in the classical sense, but it was powerful, honest. When he finished, there was silence again. Ms. Whitmore stared at him, her lips parted slightly. She had expected him to fail, to embarrass himself. But instead he had done the impossible. Taken a song he barely knew and turned it into something beautiful. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then from the back of the class, someone whispered, "Wow." Ms. Whitmore straightened, her face pale. "That was not what I asked for," she said finally. "But it was impressive." The word impressive sounded like it cost her effort. Malik looked up at her, not with anger, but with quiet pride. "Thank you, ma'am," he said simply. The class ended soon after, but the air between them had changed. Malik walked out of the room unsure if he had won or lost. But one thing was clear. He had shown her again that his music wasn't luck. It was real. It came from a place she couldn't control or define. And though she didn't admit it, Ms. Whitmore knew it too. Behind her stern expression, a small crack had formed in the wall of her pride. She had tried to mock him again, to break him. But instead, his music had reminded her of something she had forgotten long ago. That true art doesn't come from rules or paper. It comes from the soul. Malik didn't sleep much that night. The sound of the piano keys echoed in his mind. Every note, every breath, every moment he had played under pressure. Even though he had surprised everyone again, something inside him still hurt. He hadn't wanted to prove himself. He had just wanted to belong. But Ms. Whitmore's eyes that day, cold, calculating, told him she wasn't finished with him yet. The next morning, when he arrived at school, the whispers were louder. The students weren't mocking him anymore. They were amazed. Some looked at him with newfound respect, but others with jealousy. He heard bits of their conversations. "Did you see how he played? I didn't think he could do that. He didn't even use the sheet." Malik tried to ignore it, but deep down he felt both proud and nervous. His talent had made him stand out, and standing out, he had already learned, could be dangerous in a place like St. Albans. When he entered the music hall, the grand piano gleamed again in the sunlight. It looked almost alive, as if waiting for him. Ms. Whitmore stood near it, her back straight, her face calm but distant. She didn't greet him. She didn't greet anyone. She was quiet in a way that made everyone uneasy. As the lesson began, she spoke with her usual clipped tone. "Today," she said, "we will talk about discipline in performance. Talent without discipline is like fire without control, bright but dangerous." Her eyes drifted toward Malik for just a second before she continued. "And sometimes," she added, "people mistake emotion for excellence. But true excellence follows structure, not feeling." Malik lowered his gaze. He knew those words were meant for him. After a few minutes of theory discussion, Ms. Whitmore announced a new exercise. "Each student will play a short piece to demonstrate their progress," she said. "We'll begin alphabetically." Malik's last name started with B, which meant he'd be near the top of the list. His palms grew sweaty. He didn't want to perform again so soon. Not when he knew the teacher was looking for a reason to humble him. One by one, the students played their pieces. The room filled with music, neat, correct, emotionless. Ms. Whitmore nodded after each performance, offering small, polite comments like good control or clean phrasing. Then, it was Malik's turn. He stood up slowly, his heart pounding. As he approached the piano, the class went silent again, just like before. Everyone was curious. What would he do this time? Would he fail? Would he amaze them again? Ms. Whitmore looked at him coolly. "Let's see if you've learned to follow direction," she said. "Play the exercise we practiced last week." No improvisation, no changes. Malik nodded and sat down. He placed his fingers on the keys, his mind racing. He remembered practicing that exercise, a simple melody meant to test timing. It wasn't expressive or beautiful, just mechanical. He started playing. The notes came out clean but flat. His body didn't move with the rhythm. His heart wasn't in. His body didn't move with the rhythm. His heart wasn't in. It sounded like a robot playing, perfect on the outside, empty on the inside. Halfway through, Ms. Whitmore interrupted him. "Stop," she said. The class looked up, startled. "Do you see, class?" she said, turning toward the others. "This is what happens when someone plays without understanding structure. He's capable, yes, but he refuses to follow instruction, and that refusal, that pride, will limit him." Malik's throat tightened. The words hit like small, sharp stones. "I wasn't refusing," he said softly. I play better when I feel the music." Ms. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "You feel the music? How charming. But this isn't a jazz club, Malik. This is an academy. We don't rely on feelings here. We rely on skill." The class stayed silent. No one dared to defend him. Malik looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to the piano. "May I try again?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, surprised by his calmness. "Fine," she said. But this time, no excuses. He nodded. This time, he didn't look at the notes. He didn't think about structure or precision. He just played. The same melody, but alive and smooth, emotional, beautiful. The rhythm breathed, the sound flowed naturally. It wasn't perfect by the book, but it moved people. When he finished, the silence that followed felt deeper than before. Ms. Whitmore stood frozen, her face unreadable. "That," she said finally, her voice softer than usual, "was not what I asked for." She paused. But it was. Extraordinary. Malik didn't respond. He just nodded respectfully and returned to his seat. For the rest of the class, Ms. Whitmore didn't look at him again. She spoke normally, but her voice had lost some of its sharpness. Inside her, something had cracked, a small realization she didn't want to admit. As the bell rang and the students packed their bags, Malik walked toward the door. Just as he was about to leave, he heard Ms. Whitmore's voice behind him. "Malik," she said quietly. He turned around. She hesitated, then said, "You play differently. Is that good or bad, ma'am?" he asked. She looked at him for a long second before replying. "I haven't decided yet." Malik smiled faintly. "Maybe that's because it's not for you to decide," he said gently. Then he left the room. For the first time, Ms. Whitmore didn't feel anger or control. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Respect mixed with confusion. She had tried to mock him, to prove him wrong, but instead he had forced her to feel something through music. Something she couldn't explain. Something that shook the walls she had built inside herself. And as the classroom emptied, the echo of his melody lingered, soft, emotional, and haunting, as if reminding her that sometimes the truest lessons come from the ones we try hardest not to learn. The following morning felt different from any day before. A quiet buzz filled the school halls. Whispers, half-smiles, and curious looks that seemed to follow Malik everywhere he went. Students who once ignored him now turned their heads when he passed. A few even smiled awkwardly, as if trying to show respect without admitting why. Malik didn't say much, but deep inside he felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He had never wanted attention. All he'd wanted was a fair chance and a place to belong. But now, after his performances, he had become a kind of mystery to everyone. Even the older students had heard about the new boy who played like a professional. When he entered the music hall that day, the air felt charged, like the room itself remembered what had happened there. The piano gleamed under the morning light, polished to perfection. Ms. Whitmore stood beside it, holding her usual folder of sheet music, her face as still and serious as ever. But her eyes had changed. They didn't hold that cold superiority anymore. There was something else in them now. Hesitation, maybe even curiosity. As the class settled, Ms. Whitmore spoke in her calm, clipped voice. "Today we will focus on listening rather than playing," she announced. "A true musician must learn to hear the story behind the notes." She gestured to the record player at the front of the room. A classical melody began to play. Soft, elegant, precise. "Beethoven," she said. "His compositions express both order and chaos, beauty through structure." Malik listened carefully. He'd heard this piece before, late at night on the old radio his mother kept by the kitchen window. Back then, the melody had felt warm and comforting, full of emotion. But now, in this cold, quiet classroom, it felt distant, like a painting trapped behind glass. Ms. Whitmore paused the music. "Now," she said, "can anyone tell me what this piece means?" Several hands shot up. "It's about balance," one student said. "It represents control," another added. Ms. Whitmore nodded approvingly, then her eyes found Malik. "And what do you think, Malik?" He froze. Everyone turned to look at him. He thought for a moment, then spoke softly. "I think it's about sadness that's trying not to show." The room went silent. Ms. Whitmore tilted her head slightly. "Sadness?" she repeated. "Yes," Malik said. "It sounds like someone pretending to be fine, but if you listen carefully, the music feels like it's holding back tears." No one spoke for a few seconds. Even Ms. Whitmore looked unsure how to respond. Finally, she said, "That's a very unusual interpretation." Malik lowered his gaze. "That's just what I hear," he said quietly. The class continued, but something had shifted again. The students glanced at Malik differently, not with mockery, but with quiet admiration. Even Ms. Whitmore seemed distracted for the rest of the period, as if her own lesson had turned on her. When the bell rang, she stopped Malik as he was leaving. "Wait," she said softly. The other students exited one by one until the room was empty. Ms. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. "You hear things most people don't," she said finally. Malik shrugged. "Maybe I just listen differently." "That's what worries me," she murmured under her breath, but he heard it. He tilted his head. "Why would that worry you, ma'am?" Her lips pressed together. "Because music is a discipline, Malik. It's not supposed to be wild emotion. You can't simply play what you feel. There are rules for a reason." Malik looked at the piano and said quietly, "Maybe rules make people afraid to feel." That simple sentence hung in the air like a challenge. Soft, but undeniable. For the first time, Ms. Whitmore didn't have an answer. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Later that day, during lunch, Malik sat by himself again. But this time, he wasn't alone for long. Two students, Clara and Daniel, the teacher's top favorites, approached him hesitantly. "Hey," Clara said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That thing you said in class? About sadness in the music. It was kind of beautiful." Malik smiled shyly. "Thanks," he said. Daniel added, "You really played amazing the other day. I didn't even know someone could play like that without reading music." Malik shrugged. "I just play what I feel." The three of them talked for a few minutes and small things like school, music, and teachers. For the first time since coming to St. Alden's, Malik felt something he hadn't felt before: connection. That afternoon, when the final bell rang, Ms. Whitmore stayed in the music hall alone. The sunlight streamed through the windows, landing softly on the piano keys. She sat down and placed her fingers on the instrument, something she hadn't done in weeks. She began to play. At first it was flawless, every note clean, every rhythm precise. But something felt empty. The melody had no warmth, no feeling. She stopped and sighed. Then, almost unconsciously, she closed her eyes and began to play again. This time letting go of the sheet music, letting her fingers move freely. The tune shifted, softer, uncertain, but real. For the first time in years, she felt her heart in the sound. When she finished, she sat still, realizing something that both frightened and humbled her. The boy she had tried to humiliate had reminded her what music truly was. Meanwhile, across town, Malik sat by his small keyboard, playing the same melody he'd heard her teach that morning. But in his own way, filled with life, pain, and joy. Two people worlds apart, playing the same tune for the first time, one rediscovering emotion, the other finding peace in being heard. Neither of them knew it yet, but that fragile connection, teacher and student divided by prejudice, joined by music, and was just the beginning of a change neither could stop. The next few days passed like slow-moving clouds, heavy and full of tension. Everyone at St. Alden's still talked about the music class, but never in front of Ms. Whitmore. When she walked by, conversations died, and students pretended to study. Something had changed in her. Her voice was quieter, her posture still firm but less certain, as if she carried an invisible weight. Malik, too, felt that something had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't invisible anymore. People greeted him in the hallways. Some asked about music. Others just smiled awkwardly. But even with the new attention, he stayed humble. Deep inside, he knew his journey at St. Alden's wasn't over, especially with Ms. Whitmore watching him so closely. On Thursday morning, the air in the music room was sharp with tension. The sunlight spilled through the tall windows, bouncing off the grand piano that had now become a stage for something bigger than music. A silent battle between teacher and student. Ms. Whitmore stood at the front, arms folded, her expression unreadable. "Today," she began, "we will have a formal rehearsal for the Founders' Assembly performance next week. Each class must present one piece. I will choose the student who best represents our school's standard of excellence. Student who best represents our school's standard of excellence." Her words echoed around the room. Everyone knew what she meant. She was going to decide who would perform in front of the entire school, teachers and parents. It was the biggest event of the term. Students began whispering eagerly. Some looked nervous, others hopeful. Malik said nothing. He already knew he wouldn't be chosen. Not after everything that had happened. But then Ms. Whitmore's voice cut through the chatter. "Malik, you will start." The room froze. Malik looked up, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Me, ma'am?" "Yes," she said calmly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You seem to enjoy performing. Let's see if you can handle it when it matters." A few students exchanged surprised looks. Malik stood slowly and walked to the piano. His heart was pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the whispers behind him. Ms. Whitmore stepped aside, folding her hands. "You may play anything you wish," she said. "Let's hear your best." Malik sat down, staring at the polished keys. His reflection looked back at him, small, nervous, but determined. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He remembered his mother's words. "When people don't believe in you, let your music do the talking." Then he began to play. The first note was soft, almost too soft, but it carried a warmth that filled the room instantly. The melody flowed out of him like sunlight spilling through clouds. It wasn't a piece from the school's library or a famous composer's work. It was something his mother used to hum when she cooked dinner, a tune he had built upon, reshaped, made his own. The class fell completely silent. His fingers moved gracefully, every touch gentle yet powerful. The music told a story of struggle, of love, of hope. Each note was alive. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He was simply sharing a piece of his heart. When the song ended, the room remained still. Not one student moved. Ms. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. For a moment, she didn't even breathe. Then she said softly, "Again." Malik blinked. "Ma'am?" "Play it again," she repeated. He hesitated, then nodded and played once more. This time his confidence grew. The sound was richer, the rhythm smoother, the feeling stronger. The piano seemed to respond to him, its notes singing under his touch. When the final note faded, Ms. Whitmore turned slowly toward the class. "That," she said quietly, "is what true expression sounds like." The students looked stunned. Clara smiled, eyes shining. Even Daniel, usually too proud to praise anyone, clapped softly, but Ms. Whitmore wasn't smiling. She looked unsettled, almost emotional. She cleared her throat. "Malik will represent our class at the Founders' Assembly." The room erupted in whispers. Malik's mouth fell open. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. "Ma'am, are you sure?" one student asked. "Yes," Ms. Whitmore said firmly. "He has something rare, something you can't teach." Malik sat frozen, unsure whether to smile or cry. The same teacher who once mocked him was now giving him the greatest opportunity of his life. After class, Ms. Whitmore called him over. "You'll stay after school to rehearse," she said. "If you're going to perform, it must be perfect." "Yes, ma'am," Malik said softly. When the room emptied, she stood beside him by the piano. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "You remind me of someone I knew long ago. A student I once discouraged because I thought discipline mattered more than feeling. I was wrong then. And maybe I was wrong about you too." Malik looked at her, surprised. "Thank you, ma'am," he said simply. She gave a small nod. "Don't thank me. Just make the world hear you." That night, Malik stayed in the empty classroom long after everyone left. The janitor passed by, humming softly as Malik played. The golden light from the hallway shone across the piano keys. His fingers danced over the notes, confident, free, alive. And though the hallways were silent, the music carried far beyond the walls, reaching not just the ears of those who once doubted him, but touching something deeper inside every person who would one day hear his story. The performance at the Founders' Assembly was still a week away, but Malik had already won something greater, respect. And deep within Ms. Whitmore's heart, something began to melt, a long frozen part of her that was learning once again what it meant to feel. The morning of the Founders' Assembly arrived like a scene from a dream, the school buzzing with excitement, the grand hall filled with golden light, and banners fluttering in the soft breeze that slipped through open windows. Students in crisp uniforms moved nervously through the corridors, whispering, rehearsing, checking their notes. The air carried a mix of polish and tension, pride and fear. For Malik, it felt like stepping into another world. He stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly, his reflection caught in the glossy surface of the grand piano that had become both his friend and his test. He could hear the muffled sound of the principal's voice echoing from the stage. Introductions, speeches, the rustle of applause. Ms. Whitmore stood a few steps away, her usual calmness replaced with quiet focus. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but her presence was steady. For the first time since he met her, Malik didn't feel judged under her gaze. He felt guided. "You'll do well," she said finally, her tone even but softer than he'd ever heard it. "Are you sure?" Malik asked, half smiling. "You don't think I'm too emotional?" For a moment, Ms. Whitmore almost smiled. "Emotion isn't your weakness, Malik, it's your language. Just remember, control the storm, don't drown in it." He nodded. Her words stayed with him as the student before him finished playing a violin piece. A polite round of applause followed, and then the principal's voice rang out again. Next, representing the music department, Malik Brown. The applause grew louder. Malik took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. Rows of students, teachers, and parents sat in the audience, their faces blurred by the glow. He could feel every heartbeat echoing in his chest. But when he sat at the piano, his hands hovering over the keys, the noise in his head slowly began to fade. He remembered his mother's voice again. "Play like you're talking to God, not people." And then he began. The first notes floated out like whispers, gentle, slow, tender. The hall fell silent. It wasn't just music, and it was storytelling. The melody carried everything he had ever felt: loneliness, struggle, fear, pride, and love. His fingers moved with precision but also with soul. He poured himself into every sound, letting the keys speak when words never could. The melody swelled, deep and powerful, like waves rising and falling with emotion. It was no longer a performance, it was a confession, a release, a prayer. In the crowd, Ms. Whitmore watched closely. At first, she had intended to critique every note, to measure his technique, but soon she couldn't. The sound broke through her guard. It wasn't perfect. There were small slips, a few uneven rhythm, but none of that mattered. His music had life, real raw life. Parents began leaning forward. Students forgot to whisper. Even the principal, known for his stern expression, blinked back a flicker of emotion. When Malik played the final note, the sound hung in the air for a moment. Fragile, glowing, eternal. Then silence, a single clap broke it. Then another. Then the entire hall erupted in applause, loud, heartfelt, rising like thunder. Malik sat frozen for a second, not sure what to do. Then he stood slowly and bowed, his cheeks warm, his chest tight. For a moment he could barely see through the tears forming in his eyes. When he turned, Ms. Whitmore was standing near the curtain, her expression unreadable, but her eyes glistened. She was clapping too, slowly at first, then fully, proudly. After the assembly, the hallway filled with cheers. Students he had never spoken to before stopped to congratulate him. Teachers smiled warmly, some even patting his shoulder. Malik felt light, almost weightless. But the most unexpected moment came when Ms. Whitmore approached him quietly, away from the crowd. "You did more than play," she said softly. "You reminded everyone here what music is supposed to feel like." "Thank you, ma'am," Malik said, still catching his breath. She hesitated, then added, "I owe you an apology." He blinked, surprised. "For what?" "For underestimating you," she said. "For assuming where greatness can come from. I thought discipline created talent. You showed me that heart creates art. Malik smiled faintly. You taught me discipline, though. Maybe we both needed each other. Ms. Whitmore actually smiled this time, a real one. Maybe we did, she said. You should know, Malik. I've been teaching for 20 years, and today I felt music again. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the sound of laughter and celebration echoing down the hall. It was the first time they shared silence not made of tension, but of understanding. Silence not made of tension, but of understanding. Later that day, as Malik packed his things, he found a small envelope on the piano bench. Inside was a handwritten note. True talent humbles the teacher. Thank you for reminding me why I began. Ms. W. Malik smiled, his heart full. He slipped the note into his pocket, knowing he'd keep it forever. As he walked out of the hall, the afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, bathing the golden walls in warmth. His reflection passed across the polished floors. Not the quiet, nervous boy who once walked in alone, but someone new. Someone who had earned his place not by proving others wrong, but by staying true to who he was. And somewhere behind him, Ms. Whitmore stood in the empty hall, listening to the echo of his performance in her memory, realizing that sometimes the greatest lessons come not from teaching, but from being willing to learn again.